Scaling and growing a startup can be tricky and sometimes even mysterious. It requires leaders to have a breadth of knowledge on company building strategies across marketing, sales, product, and talent. The Startup Guide to Growth was created to be the definitive podcast on growth strategies for startups. Hosted by Sapphire Ventures, we bring you actionable growth strategies that you can use to scale your company through insights and stories from accomplished operators. Ready to grow your startup? Then listen up.
All opinions expressed by podcast hosts and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions or views of Sapphire Ventures, LLC. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes and should not be construed as an investment recommendation or otherwise relied upon as the basis for investment decisions.
On this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Steve Hallowell. Steve has led major sales transformation efforts at some of the fastest growing technology companies over the past decade, such as Responses, MuleSoft, Snowflake, and today at Highspot. His roles have spanned sales enablement, sales operations, and product marketing. He has a unique perspective on building a go-to-market engine that can support both high productivity and rapid scale. On this episode, we discuss getting strong sales productivity across your teams, the core responsibilities of a best-in-class sales enablement team, and when you should think about starting a sales enablement function. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Rico. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I'd like to kick it off by getting to understand a little bit about your background, your career, and experiences in the go-to-market space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been part of, let's say, I guess this is now my fourth company in sort of the growth stage. I've typically joined in the sort of lower tens of millions of revenue and then scaled up from there up to 500 million and beyond. And I think one of the kind of defining elements of what I've been involved in is that, at least to my experience, each of these companies needs to undergo a pretty significant transformation in its growth journey. And so a lot of what I've focused on is helping to lead that transformation process of help us go from kind of the early days of selling to innovators and early adopters to really being able to sell to the mass market, sell based on value, challenger selling, and the like. And doing that from the chair, typically of sales enablement, sales operations, sales strategy, leading those teams.
So how many different sales methodologies have you used?
I've seen plenty, but as I think you and most of your listeners would appreciate, there's some common themes across them that it's really about kind of finding the nuggets that are really pertinent. And typically, actually, we've just kind of rolled our own based on the best of what's out there.
Great reinvention of all the best elements of the ones out there. That sounds good. One of the things you're working on is the strategic enablement framework currently, and it's a methodology or a blueprint. And one of the things you and I talked about before is really nailing what we call sales productivity, what I called sales productivity linearity. So what does that mean, and how does that framework kind of support that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So one of the things that has really stuck out to me, and this is both from the companies that I've been an employee of, but also other companies I've had the chance to work with over the years. I think we all sort of assume in our lives that things follow a bell curve, and especially that seller performance follows a bell curve, where most people are kind of in the middle. And yet the unfortunate reality for salespeople is that there's often an awful lot more way off on the left-hand side of that curve who are not doing real well. Maybe their attainment is less than 75 or less than 50% of quota, which is not a great place to be for them or for the company. To me, the implication of this, if you're trying to scale, is pretty big. That it's kind of like if you've got let's say you had a big V12 engine in your car, you got this awesome big engine, but only 2 cylinders are working. So you're dragging around this big heavy thing, and you're not getting the performance. And for companies, that big heavy thing shows up in terms of expense. You've got a marketing and sales development organization cranking out leads and opportunities that land with reps who aren't able to close them. You've got a bunch of reps who are taking time from sales leadership. You've got SC, technical sales time. You've got other specialist time that's all being wasted because you've got a big group of your organization that is struggling to really perform at the level they could. And when I see this, it's a sign that typically the organization hasn't figured out how to take what the best people are doing. So what is actually working to sell this product? What are the things that we know to be true, and helping that broader base of people do it? Instead, they're kind of relying on, we've got some very capable people. Maybe it's that they've been at the company a long time. Maybe it's that they're exceptionally talented. Maybe they have, phenomenal territories. It could be any one of those things. But we're allowing there to be a situation where some people are sort of, either lucky or exceptionally smart, but that's not something we're able to scale. And of course, if you're trying to scale a business from, whatever size you are to something much larger, you want all those cylinders firing as effectively as possible. And so that's really what this framework is designed to do, is to say, how do you actually help get that consistent performance across your team?
What are usually the failures in those cylinders? Like how do they should manifest themselves in a company? And then maybe briefly touch upon, like, how do you correct those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it comes down to two things that are pretty simple to say, but hard to do in reality. It comes down to, one, have you really gotten clear about what you want your people to go do? That sounds like one of those things, of course we know what we want our people to go do. And yet maybe you do in sort of an implicit way, but is it written down and kind of documented at the level that somebody else can follow it? Just because one or two salespeople or your senior executives know what great looks like, that doesn't mean it's in a form that you can scale it yet. And often companies don't get specific enough about what they want their teams to do. This doesn't mean sort of trying to create a paint by numbers environment. You're never going to, this is not a, take away all the thought from the reps. There's still a tremendous amount of thought that has to be done. But you don't want to ask people to reinvent the wheel over and over again when there's simply no good reason to do that. That's where you get a lot of kind of error in this. And it'd be kind of would be like, let's say you wanted to get a bunch of people to go climb a big mountain, take your mountain of choice, whether you're Mount Rainier or Mount Whitney on the West Coast, Mount Washington on the East Coast. And let's say under some challenging circumstances, like right now in February. And if I just told people, hey, top of the mountain's that way, go, figure it out, probably my success rate wouldn't be real high. On the other hand, if I give them a map and the right clothes and the right training and the right gear, in terms of how to navigate those situations in the winter, my success rate is going to be a lot higher. So those people still have a lot of hard work to do. They still have to climb the mountain. They may have to figure out how to get across, icy snowfields on their own, but at least we're setting them up for success versus making them figure it out from scratch.
And the equipment in this example would be playbooks, video training. What have you found to be like the most effective training mechanisms for sales teams?
Well, so that actually touches on the other kind of half of the framework. You asked about the failure modes. One is that we're just simply not clear with the team about what we want them to do. The other is we don't have a systematic approach and process for really, helping embed those behaviors in the team. We're not helping the team really master the things that matter. And I think about sort of 4 layers to that. The first layer is where, it's kind of what we were just talking about. Have you written down what you want people to do? Is it well documented? Is it clear? Do they have the resources and tools, be that, sales facing assets, decks, discovery guides, just background on their customer, et cetera. And that would be the analogy of I've given you the map and the field guide and the ice axe and the jacket and told you to go have at it. But for most of us, that's not enough. If you asked me to go climb Mount Rainier right now with just that experience, that I would not do it. I would say, hey man, I'm not putting my life at risk. I would want to go practice with that special gear and build confidence in a safe place. And so the training piece is about, really good training should break down a complex concept, especially if you're trying to really understand your product differentiation or really understand, a persona that you're engaging and their challenges. How do I break that down into small pieces, make it easy to understand it, and help people learn in a structured way? The other piece of that is having structured practice. So, most of us learn by doing. We want to try things in a safe environment. We want to get feedback. And then once we're feeling confident, then we can go out and do it in the real world. And often organizations don't provide enough structured practice that the reps say, I get this. This makes sense to me. And I feel good about doing it in the real world. It stops somewhere short of that. And so there's this sort of confidence divide that folks have to bridge. The next layer after that is if you don't actually manage to it, if there's not an expectation in the field that we actually go do this, you could give me all the training in the world, you could give me all the stuff. And if I'm kind of nervous about this, I might keep delaying the day I'm going to go try that hike for a long time. But if you say, hey, look, Steve, we're going to pick a date, we're going to pick a customer, we're going to go do it together. I'm going to be there to coach you and let's go try it. Obviously I'm going to get that done. And so I think that next piece that companies tend to miss is sales management really engaged in driving these things? Does a frontline sales manager know it's part of their responsibility to go drive these things? And do they have the training in terms of how to go coach it?
I think that's a great point. There needs to be very tight alignment with those frontline sales managers to make sure that they're also communicating what you just mentioned. One of the other areas I wanted to focus on is really the role of sales enablement. I feel like it can be nebulous, but that responsibility, I think, of the framework you just mentioned and those 4 levels to execute on them is the sales enablement team. But can you give me, through your eyes and your experiences, what really and truly the role of sales enablement is, and how does it work most effectively within an organization?
Yeah. So, I think if you go back to these 2 pillars of defining what great looks like and then scaling great, if you will, define the winning behaviors, help people master the winning behaviors. Classic sales enablement is going to be over on the right of helping to master winning behaviors. And, the tools in the toolkit are typically, I can, work with marketing and build content. I can make that available. I can run training. And actually, sometimes I think organizations sort of over delegate to sales enablement and say, hey, sales enablement is just going to fix this problem for me, without recognizing the role that sales management needs to play in there as well, and really creating a strong interlock there. So, I think that the table stakes for sales enablement is driving those first 2 pieces. The next level of strength is that they're really going to be pushing to engage sales management and building the sales manager enablement and have that very tight interlock with sales leadership to drive those things, really having a point of view on what do people inside and outside of the enablement team need to do to drive these behaviors. The next level after that is this more kind of strategic side of helping to define what great looks like. And this, again, is something that sales enablement can't do by themselves. I find you really need sales leadership, it's marketing leadership, it's enablement, and ops has a role to play as well to get really clear about what we want the best people to go do. But somebody's got to lead that charge. And the reason that the companies so often don't do this well is you look across that group of people and no one of those people feels accountability on a daily basis to getting it right. That often the sales leader would be kind of a natural place to go. But sales leader, with all the right intention, can get caught up in the day-to-day. They may not be as comfortable operating in a zone of sort of, hey, let me step back and build some frameworks around this and sort of architecting that plan. The marketing leader might be a little stronger there, but often the marketing leader is pretty removed from the day-to-day of the sales conversations. And so one of the places that I think really strategic enablement can play a big role is to quarterback that effort, to make sure that that work is getting done, pulling the right people into workshops or discussions to drive the organization to have a very clear view of what exactly do we want our people to do, so that we have something that the rest of the kind of more tactical enablement team can actually go help scale and drive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that definitely does. And I like how you broke it down into those 2 core functions and then where the overlap is, almost kind of visualizing a Venn diagram. Also, the role is a challenging role to be in sales enablement because, I mean, let's be honest, working in sales is pretty stressful. You're measured quarterly. It's pretty obvious if you did good or if you did not do good. So you really have to make this enablement activities, whatever they may be, easy, right? Not so it doesn't look like it's impeding on their job. If anything, obviously helping to accelerate it. So are there any ways to make it easy? I guess maybe one of those ways is kind of integrating it with sales management, right? So it becomes one. Are there other ways to make it easy?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I think about making it easy, I want to make it as first off, I want to make it as easy as possible for your sellers to do what you want them to do. So that means taking friction out of that process as much as possible. So that's things like, can they find the material they need? Are there clear examples of, hey, this is what, not necessarily the CEO or the head of sales, but a peer doing what you want them to do, where they can look at somebody and say, that person's like me. They're not somebody who's sort of special. I can replicate that. I can copy what that person's doing. Are those examples there? So that's kind of the foundation of making it easy. Now, sometimes you're going to need to push the reps sometimes, and that's okay. That's where training shouldn't always be easy. In fact, I believe that if training is easy, it's probably not adding a lot of value. So if you need to have training, if you say, hey, we have a gap, it's okay to make that pretty challenging. And in fact, people will probably respond better if that's pretty challenging than if it's something where they say is a layup. I don't really need to be doing this. So I think there's a little bit of a trap in making it easy. We want to take friction out where friction is an impediment. But if we have some real meaty skills to go develop, that's going to require challenging training, challenging practice, real accountability. And that's the only way those pieces are going to come together. But we want to make sure that everybody along the way, whatever job we're asking them to do, it's clear and straightforward in terms of what that ask is, whether that's an AE or that's a sales manager that we're asking to inspect and coach these activities.
I think that's a great description of it. And then also there needs to be some level of accountability. So how do you kind of create accountability around a lot of these resources? Because, to run an enablement program, it is expensive in some cases. It is, resource commitments where resources are inherently scarce within a startup. So how do you create accountability to make sure that everyone's kind of executing on the vision you set out?
Yeah, so I think that the really clear thing comes back to having clear goals and knowing what you want the team to go accomplish. And so, you may start with sort of an objective like we want faster onboarding, but it's important that the enablement leader and the sales leader are able to dissect that a bit and say, okay, well, why is onboarding too slow today? What's the place that people are struggling? And, let's say a common place might be, hey, new hires are slow to build pipeline. So then you say, okay, great. That's something that's tangible now. That's something that I can measure, I can look at pretty quickly. And, now we can say, okay, so one of the things that we did at MuleSoft and I replicated at Snowflake, and I'll give Simon Parmet over at MuleSoft credit for frankly pushing me to do this, which was, we built out a dashboard where we knew for every new hire, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, what should their pipeline build look like? And we were able to see who's red, who's green. And if somebody was in the red, then that prompted, I would have somebody on my team go have a chat with their sales manager, diagnose it. What's the issue here? What do we need to fix? Some of these were one-off things like, somebody got their territory too late or somebody's SDR pairing wasn't working out well. But sometimes there are things that we said, hey, we're not, systematically enabling people on the right stuff. People are struggling thematically in a common place. And so we need to go build a program to go fix that. But you have to be anchored on something really concrete that you want the team to go do. And it's got to be concrete enough that it's actionable and you can measure it.
Yeah, I think visibility is key, right? If you can't measure it, then you can't fix it. And I also think the example you used there is kind of getting to first principles, right? Like onboarding is just too broad of a thing to tackle with an initiative. You need to have the pain point to identify what initiative to point it at. So I think that's excellent. A lot of companies, are in this growth stage and, sales enablement isn't there from day one. So when, from your experiences doing this multiple times at a few companies and now in your role kind of enabling sales enablement teams, when do you think the right time is to start this organization within a startup?
I think when you get to around a dozen to 2 dozen sales reps is about the right time to do it. I would say most companies, I've usually been hired too late. I've typically been kind of the first enablement hire and gone on to build that organization. And it's usually too late. It's sort of at the point that there's a lot more catch up and kind of retrofitting things in ways that if we just got it right in the first place, we'd be better off. But I would say the reason if you go earlier, it can be tempting, especially in early stages, to say, we just want somebody who can go run a little bit of training. And I actually think that's one of the less important pieces early on, because you don't have the scale that really demands kind of rigorous and consistent training. Your managers can do that. I think the piece of, are we systematically, at that stage, you're learning how to sell. You're learning what that best path for selling your product is, and what that motion looks like. And so the ability to have somebody with enough sort of sales experience and ability to kind of think abstractly and package things to help you accelerate that process of codifying what the best people are doing, and then helping to disseminate that across the team. How do you sort of accelerate the organizational learning of the company as you're learning how to sell your product, I think is one of the best things you could have in a first enablement hire.
Also, so somewhat being like the detective to identify the winning playbooks, the winning strategies that you can then go implement. Don't assume that you know it before you hire that sales enablement person, because you're probably at that point still getting anecdotal evidence. Is I think what I'm pulling out of this, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, maybe the head of sales knows it, and maybe the head of sales, it's very natural for the head of sales, but head of sales doesn't usually have time to kind of really write that down and codify it in a way that all the folks you're hiring can then replicate it. And so the ability, the other thing I find, I think is common in many fields, is that somebody who's sort of second nature at doing something is often not great at teaching, because they just do it naturally. They don't know how to communicate clearly, I'm doing this for this reason. And it often takes a partner to work with them and sort of ask them questions like, why did you do it that way? Why not do it this way? Tell me more about that. And that act of sort of really packaging and crystallizing whether it's the head of sales or a top AE is doing, so that you can then scale it, is one of the pieces that I think is very often missed.
That's great. I like to end these conversations with a question a little bit off the beat of what we've been talking about. So I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite hobby? I don't know. We had a lot of mountain analogy, so I don't know if you climb Mount Rainier. What's your favorite hobby, and why do you enjoy it?
Yeah, so so sort of is the answer. I love getting outside and being active, and whether that's running, cycling, hiking, what have you. That's kind of my place to go blow off steam, and how I manage stress and stay healthy and all those things. It's a good day for me is when I've gotten some really good aerobic exercise in. And I'm not I'm actually kind of haven't really gravitated towards like the big mountain climbing. I'm not sort of a technical climber. I'm more endorphin versus adrenaline in that way. But I actually do think something like Rainier could be a lot of fun to do someday. But I have no aspirations for something like Everest or the really big mountains.
No, Rainier would be pretty cool. I like the endorphin versus adrenaline thing. I think I kind of do those activities for the same reasons, and especially now it's kind of critical just to get outside, since we're all always inside, and our surroundings aren't changing as much as they used to be when we were in a different environment. So that's great. Steve, once again, I want to thank you for your time. This was a great discussion. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Is LinkedIn?
LinkedIn's great. They can also just shoot me an email, steve.hallowell@highspot.com. Happy to chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the time, Steve, and look forward to having more discussions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rico. Good to talk to you.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Startup Guide to Growth. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we invite you to visit sapphireventures.com for detailed show notes, additional company building resources, and information on how you can connect with Sapphire Ventures and our team. Please subscribe and rate our podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Google so that other operators and entrepreneurs can find our show. And make sure to tune into next week's episode to discover the latest trends, techniques, and strategies for startup success. Until next time, keep building.